The American landscape in the early 1970s was one of transition and sudden, jarring change. For a decade, the asphalt arteries of the nation had been dominated by the roar of high-displacement V8 engines and the smell of burning rubber. The muscle car was the undisputed king of the road, representing a generation that valued raw power, speed, and a certain kind of aggressive masculinity. But by 1973, the high-octane dream was beginning to evaporate. An oil embargo had sent gas prices skyrocketing, and lines at service stations stretched for blocks. Simultaneously, new federal regulations regarding emissions and safety began to choke the life out of the legendary pony cars. The GTO and the Charger were becoming relics of a cheaper, faster past. Yet, even as the muscle car took its final breath, a new subculture was quietly idling in the driveways of the American suburbs. It was larger, slower, and infinitely more strange. This was the era of the custom van, a period when the unassuming work vehicle was transformed into a rolling sanctuary of self-expression. To understand the van craze, one must first understand the social climate of the mid-1970s. The economy was stagnant, and the optimism of the post-war era had been replaced by a lingering sense of disillusionment. For 19- and 20-year-olds, the traditional markers of adulthood like homeownership were slipping out of reach due to rising costs. Furthermore, there was a desperate desire for privacy. If you were a young person living at home with your parents, you had no space to call your own. The custom van emerged as the ultimate loophole. It was more than a vehicle. It was a mobile apartment. It was a room that you could take anywhere, far from the watchful eyes of authority or the stifling atmosphere of a wood-paneled suburban den. It was the birth of the Boogie van, and it would become the most colorful chapter in American automotive history. The process of creating a custom van usually began with a blank canvas. Enthusiasts would head to local dealerships to purchase a base-model Ford Econoline, a Chevrolet G Series, or a Dodge Ram van. In their factory form, these were utilitarian boxes designed for plumbing contractors or bread delivery men. They came with metal floors, 2 seats, and no soul. But for the vanner, this emptiness was the point. The first step in the transformation was almost always the interior. To truly create a rolling living room, the cold metal had to be hidden. Thousands of feet of thick, long-pile shag carpeting were glued to every available surface. This included the floors, the walls, and even the ceilings. The colors were often loud and psychedelic, ranging from burnt orange and avocado green to deep velvet purple. Once the carpeting was in place, the true craftsmanship began. Young men who might have failed their shop classes in high school suddenly became master carpenters. They installed custom cherry wood paneling and built wrap-around sofas that could easily fold down into queen-sized beds. Lighting was crucial for setting the mood. Intricate overhead consoles featured toggle switches that controlled dimmers, colored floodlights, and flickering disco balls. Swivel bucket seats, often plucked from high-end luxury cars or airplanes, were installed in the front so the driver and passenger could turn around to face the party in the back. But the centerpiece of any high-end van was the sound system. Massive speakers were wedged into corner cabinets, powered by heavy-duty amplifiers, and playing the hits of Led Zeppelin or Earth, Wind and Fire on high-fidelity 8-track tapes. The exterior of the van served as a public declaration of the owner's identity. This was the golden age of the mural. Gone were the racing stripes of the previous decade. They were replaced by massive, hand-painted airbrushed scenes that often covered the entire side of the vehicle. These murals were heavily influenced by the fantasy art trend of the time. You would see majestic wizards casting spells over misty mountains, Frank Frazetta-inspired warriors battling giant serpents, or high-tech spaceships drifting through galactic nebulas. These paintings were not cheap. Top-tier airbrush artists could command thousands of dollars to turn a heavy Chevy into a masterpiece. To complement the paint, owners added porthole windows in the shapes of hearts or diamonds and bolted-on chrome side pipes that let the engine breathe with a low, rhythmic rumble. The finishing touch was often a personalized name painted in elegant script on the rear door, titles like Midnight Rider, Caribbean Queen, or Dreamweaver. The cultural impact of these vans was massive and immediate. By 1975, van clubs were popping up in every state. These organizations would host large-scale gatherings known as truck-ins. A truck-in was essentially a massive, weekend-long festival held in a rural field or a large campground. Thousands of custom vans would descend on a single location, creating a temporary city of chrome and carpet. There were competitions for the best interior, the most detailed mural, and the loudest sound system. But more than the trophies, these events were about community. They were places where a person could be whoever they wanted to be, surrounded by hundreds of others who shared the same eccentric passion. It was a carnival atmosphere, filled with the smell of barbecue, the sound of constant music, and a sense of shared freedom that felt increasingly rare in mainstream society. However, as the movement grew, so did the scrutiny from the outside world. The very privacy that made the van so appealing to the youth also made it a target for moral panic. The media began to focus on the darker side of van culture. Because the back of a van was essentially a private room on wheels, rumors of illicit activities became common. This gave rise to the derogatory nickname of the sin bin. Bumper stickers with the phrase, "If this van's a rockin', don't come a knockin'," became famous, but they also fueled the fire of parental and police concern. Law enforcement began to profile vans, pulling them over under the suspicion of drug use or other mischief. To the establishment, the van was no longer a piece of art. It was a mobile hideout for delinquency. The decline of the custom van craze was not caused by a single event, but rather a perfect storm of economic and social shifts. By the late 1970s, the insurance industry had taken notice of the trend. They viewed custom vans as high risk, both because of the immense value of the modifications and the perceived lifestyle of the owners. Premiums skyrocketed, making it difficult for the average 20-year-old to keep their muraled masterpiece on the road. At the same time, the automotive industry was changing. The era of the boxy, heavy van was being challenged by the arrival of the minivan and the rise of fuel-efficient Japanese imports. As the 1980s dawned, the aesthetic of the youth culture shifted away from the shaggy, psychedelic excess of the 70s toward something more professional and sleek. The denim jackets and long hair were replaced by polo shirts and power suits. Furthermore, the technology of the vans themselves began to feel dated. The 8-track player was replaced by the cassette and then the compact disc. The heavy wood paneling and thick carpet were seen as dust traps rather than luxury. Many of the once glorious vans were sold off to second and third owners who didn't have the time or money to maintain the elaborate paint jobs. The beautiful murals began to fade and crack under the sun. The chrome side pipes rusted and the shag carpets became matted and stained. By 1985, the Boogie van had largely vanished from the streets of America, relegated to the back corners of used car lots or left to rot in wooded areas behind suburban garages. Looking back, the 1970s custom van craze was more than just a passing fad in car styling. It was a genuine folk art movement. It was a time when the average person took a mass-produced industrial product and spent hundreds of hours turning it into something unique and personal. It represented a specific moment in American history when the dream of the open road met the need for a private sanctuary. It was a rebellion against the beige uniformity of the era. The Vanners were the last of the great automotive romantics, individuals who believed that a vehicle should be an extension of the soul. Today, there is a small but dedicated resurgence of vintage vanning. A new generation is discovering the tactile joy of velvet walls and the surreal beauty of airbrushed fantasy scenes. They are rescuing those rusted shells from the woods and bringing them back to life, reminding us of a time when the road was a little slower, the carpet was a little thicker, and the possibilities were as endless as the horizon. The era of the rolling living room may have passed its peak, but the spirit of the Boogie van remains a vivid testament to the power of imagination and the eternal human desire for a space to call one's own. In a world that is increasingly digital and transparent, the idea of a private, carpeted escape on four wheels feels more alluring than ever. Each mural told a story, and each van was a kingdom. It was a fleeting, colorful explosion of creativity that proved that even in a crisis, the American spirit of innovation would find a way to keep moving forward, one shag-carpeted mile at a time.